December 4, 1974. Over the coast of Sri Lanka, Martinair Flight 138 was a chartered flight from Surabaya, Indonesia to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia via Colombo, Sri Lanka. The aircraft was operated on behalf of Garuda Indonesia. On board were 191 passengers, which included 182 Indonesian hajj pilgrims bound for Mecca, and 9 crew members. The aircraft was a McDonnell Douglas DC-8, which carried the registration PHMBH, built in 1966. It was fitted with Pratt & Whitney engines which were modified by KLM. The aircraft was owned by the Dutch company Martinair. The crew of Flight 138 were Captain Hendrik Lam, First Officer Robert Blomsma, Flight Engineer Johannes Wijnands, Purser Ingrid van der Vliet, and Flight Attendants Rita Borgels, Abdulhamid Usman, Lilika Rolati, Tisha van Dijkum, and Hendrika van Hamburg. The aircraft contacted Katanaka approach control at around 16:16 hours, indicating that they were 130 miles away. Then the ATC reported the weather conditions, and requested the aircraft to change over to Colombo area control for a descent clearance. The aircraft then descended from 35,000 feet, and was handed back over to approach control. At 16:38 hours, another air traffic controller is said to have intervened and cleared the flight down to 5,000 feet and reported clearing to 8,000 feet. Colombo approach then cleared the flight down to 2,000 feet at 16:44 hours and told the flight to expect a runway 04 approach. The crew aboard the flight were then asked to report when the airfield was in sight. The aircraft crashed into Sapthakana mountain, also known as the Virgin Hills, at an altitude of approximately 4,355 feet, and at around 40 nautical miles east of Colombo. All 191 passengers and crew were killed. The crash remains the worst in Sri Lankan aviation history, and the third deadliest involving a DC-8, after Arrow Air Flight 1285 and Nigeria Airways Flight 2120. At the time, it was the second deadliest aviation accident, after the loss of Turkish Airlines Flight 981 which occurred earlier that same year. We will now investigate how this crash happened. The following video was provided by Mtaringa on his YouTube channel. In the video we will get the perspective of the eyewitnesses and the ATC responsible at the time along with a police officer who was involved in the accident.
This was the first disaster in Sri Lanka, and it was something new to me because I was just 6 years in service and I was in charge of the control tower at that time, and I had one Mr. Surabaya as my assistant. And well, as far as I remember, this aircraft was estimating Colombo around 10:10 in the night, and these aircrafts are supposed to call the area control center. All inbound aircrafts are supposed to call the area control center, which is located at Ratmalan, that's another airfield 20 miles south of Colombo city.
This was the original flight path of Flight 138.
And we couldn't see the position of the aircraft, so we were doing procedural control. We go by the pilot's reports. So we asked the pilot his position in relation to the airport and the levels, and depending on that information only we control the aircraft. So apparently what I feel now is that this aircraft had a navigational problem, because later on, after everything was over, after the investigations were over, it was revealed that the aircraft was giving its distance to run, the miles to go, using an instrument called the Doppler. So that gives you the digital indication of the distance to go. And this particular instrument on that aircraft was off standard. According to the investigation, it had been off standard. And there had been an error of about 40 miles. When you normally fly over oceanic areas, you got to update the Doppler with a navigational facility on ground. But this had that inherent defect in the system. And this had been reported by a few pilots, according to the reports that we had been reported, but it was a modified instrument that had been on this aircraft. So I think this aircraft perhaps commenced its descent beyond the normal distance at which he could have commenced his descent. Normally a jet coming from the east, when it's about 35,000 feet, they normally commence their descent around 110 miles, just beyond the coast. But this aircraft, when he called me initially, he was 130 miles. And moments later, he would have asked for descent, thinking that he was just close to the coastline.
I was coming with my father. At that time I can hear a big noise flying this way. We saw up just to see it was a big flight with all lights and everything. It was very low.
Maybe about 4 minutes before the accident. That was around say 10:07 or so. And the first report from the pilot was that he was passing 8,000 feet for 6,000. The aircraft had been cleared to 5,000 feet by the area controller, but the pilot said he's passing 8,000 for 6,000 feet. And he very specifically said, I am 14 miles from the field. So 14 miles, when he says, it's just about 2.5 minutes flying time to the airfield. And that was a very clear, starry night. And normally, when these aircrafts make visual approaches, when they have the runway in sight, if the conditions are visual, the pilots normally they prefer to make a visual approach and do a straight in to save fuel and time, rather than coming over the field and then doing a normal conventional instrument approach procedure. So I cleared the aircraft to 2,000 feet and gave him the runway news. I instructed the aircraft to report over the field or a right base, which is a position south west of the airfield, about 10 miles, from where you can turn on to final approach, which is the normal pattern, which is the normal, we call it the circuit pattern for aircraft making visual approaches. That's the position that they have to report. The pilot acknowledged. He said he will report field over the field or field in sight. I just acknowledged, and unfortunately that was the last transmission that I got from him. And after about 3 minutes, I was looking for the aircraft. Because I expected the aircraft to be sighted. I told the controller also, just look out, the aircraft must be in the vicinity. I just looked through my glasses to see. I didn't see the aircraft. I called the aircraft. So there was no response, because by now the aircraft should have called me flight base position, or I would have sighted the aircraft by now. But this aircraft didn't call me. So I just opened the door and just went into the balcony, the small balcony there. Just tried to spot the aircraft, but still I couldn't see the aircraft. Then I made few calls on my frequency to see whether the aircraft is on my frequency. There was no answer.
This was the hill that the plane crashed upon.
I was just worried. Then I called the area controller and I said, I have lost contact with this aircraft. This should be over the field by now. Just try to raise this aircraft on your frequency. First he thought I was joking, you see. Anyway, then he was calling on the area control frequency, but he said, no luck, this is not on my frequency. Then in the meantime, it was after about 5 minutes, something was telling me in my mind, because coming from the hill country and ad hoc flight, this which is not a scheduled flight which flies down this route, those things. But I'm a pilot and I've flown over this terrain, and I know the difficulties that a pilot could have if he has not flown over the terrain. And I told my colleague, well, I suspect the aircraft has crashed. Something was telling me that the aircraft had gone down. Then just a few moments later, the telephone rang.
This was how investigators believe the crash took place, when it crashed onto the hill.
The next was to alert the rescue search and the rescue forces. I immediately went through the checklist as per the emergency plan, informed the Air Force, the police stations, the Army, and it was a very bad time of the night, and nobody has reached this place before, and the Air Force, the squadron commander of the helicopters wing, he said, my God, I wonder whether I can make it at this time of the night. And they took off immediately. They flew. The army contingent also went to Muscalia the same night. And he went up and he told me that it's inaccessible. He said it's not a place where you can land. And it's very difficult to locate that location. We'll have to go back again in the morning.
Politieinspecteur Erik Pereira.
I saw through the mist a ball of fire on the peak of one of those hills. So I didn't know what it was, but I suspected that it was the insurgents. At that time we had insurgency in Sri Lanka. I thought they were testing something because they were using small hand bombs, all that. And in that particular area, there was a concentration of these guys. So I thought they had tested something, and then it was a ball of fire through the mist I saw. So because I wanted to clear it, I immediately tried to contact my superior. That is, he was about 12 miles away. I had to get through to him on the phone, on the telephone. So I stopped the jeep on the road. I have a hillock to go to the police station. I went up to the police station, took the telephone. At that time, we didn't have this direct dialing. You had to call an operator 12 miles away central city and then get the connection. When I dialed her number, she said, "Sir, can you listen to this story, this message, which is somebody's telling something to your assistant superintendent, that is my police chief, telling something," and she plugged me onto that line. And somebody was telling my officer, my chief, that there's a big bang and an aircraft came and crashed onto the hill. It was very difficult terrain because there are leeches. You know leeches? The leeches were all over, but so we had to apply soap, all that, and then go up. And in the dark, mind you. So it took us about 3 to 4 hours to go up to the scene. As we reached somewhere close to the peak, the ball of fire was still burning. We couldn't get close, but there were pieces strewn all over the place. The windows, the seats. We didn't see any dead bodies yet. Halfway through, I found a damaged oxygen tank. So I knew I have a background in aeronautics. I was trying to be a pilot before I joined the police. So I knew immediately that this is a high altitude aircraft. So I sent it down through one of my officers to the police chief saying that this is a high altitude aircraft. It was a damaged oxygen tank. So then, having sent that, we kept on going. I think by early morning we reached the peak. By that time the fire was not there. Fire had, that was stopped. And then I found dead bodies, all in pieces. Some were hanging from the trees. I think I saw a pilot, entangled in the trees. He was in his uniform, but, fractures all over. There were a lot of, I couldn't call them dead bodies. There were pieces. And I could, if my memory serves right, there were some 200 odd bodies, I think. But there were some 200 odd bodies. The army found the black box in a gorge because it's a rocky area, and with all the pieces strewn, the black box was found inside the gorge. It was very dangerous to go in first because there is this methane gas in that. But army guys, I think they used masks or something and then went in and got the thing. The black box, I don't know what the outcome was, but we managed to find the black box that day. That was about 3 days later. And in the meantime, there were some engineers also from our aviation. They were collecting the aircraft pieces. They were trying to piece together the evidence. But our investigation didn't reveal that there was any sabotage from our point of view. But it was taken over by the aviation authority. So this was one of the worst air disasters that Sri Lanka has faced so far.
This is, I think, Martinair aeroplane tire, I think, in front of the tire. I climbed this mountain 6 or 7 times. That one time I found this tire. This one, and I have to some part of the plane and my house. I find and not to see that all the things.
I have to know that the pilot had asked for instructions as he was approaching Colombo airport, and then according to my information, it was the air traffic controller's instructions were misread by the pilot, and he descended, whereas he shouldn't have done that. I have a feeling that he descended because he noticed our hydropower area called Lakshapana. You have very bright lights, very bright lights. It is like the airport, more or less. So I think that the pilot thought this was the airport. Airport was close by because there were very powerful lights, and he descended. Then I found this the port side wingtip had scraped the rock, and when the pilot realized that he was scraping the rock, he tried to go up, and then went slap bang onto the rock at right angles, and that is how the accident took place. I have a little aeronautic background also, so this is what I think, and I'm sure he made a mistake about the Laksapana, that hydropower area, as the airport runway side. So probably he came down because of that. When he realized that it was too late, he was trying to go up, and that's how the accident took place.
In het dagblad The Daily News zei Martin Schreuder dat piloot Lamme net voor de crash de toren mededeelde dat hij de luchthaven in zicht had. Uit de gesprekken met de toren blijkt dat niet juist te zijn.
Every time I go, I take a look at the seven verges and I imagine that scrape mark. It was there, say, for about 2-3 years. Now only the moss has grown, and it was that clear, the mark where the wingtip had scraped the rock. It was there for about 2 years. So every time I go that way, I always think of the people who died in that. First time I ever faced a thing like that.
Normally, an aircraft, if he commence descents from 35,000 over the sea, over the coastline, should bring the aircraft over the hills around, say, 12 to 15,000 feet over the hills when he's crossing. But this aircraft is about, I think he had 4,300 something, so it was too low. So that error attributes to this disaster. That's what I personally feel. It was the next day. They flew on executive jet the next day itself, and the tapes were all sealed with the Director General Civil Aviation, and they played it at the airport. They wanted to identify the voice and listen to the conversation, and he identified the voice as the co-pilot's voice. And when the co-pilot said, "I am 4 miles," because they thought that the controllers would have maybe heard it wrong, you see. But the voice was very clear, and you could hear the pilot saying, "I am 4 miles from the field." That gentleman, he just did this, and he said, "Okay." He won't listen anymore because he knew the mistake is with the pilots. Because if he said, "I'm 4 miles," he can't hit at 43 miles away. Some navigational error he knew.
Investigators listed the cause of the accident to be a controlled flight into terrain also known as CFIT, as the crew descended the aircraft below safe altitude due to incorrect identification of their position over the airport. The investigation believed that this was the result of overdependence on Doppler and weather radar systems on board Martinair 138, which left room for misinterpretation. A small memorial has been built in the town of Norton Bridge, which is several miles from the crash site. In addition, a tire which was recovered from the crash site has been put on display to the public. The tire, even though displayed in public, remains property of the Norton Bridge Police. A second memorial, placed by family members from Asia and Europe, has been put on the slopes below the place of accident. Approximately 30 years after the accident, Martinair added a plaquette with only the 8 names of the crew. On the listed airfield a memorial has been placed as well. The reason for this location is unknown. Sri Lankan artist Anton Jones sang about the incident in his song Kande Hapu Namahawanan There, which translated means a plane that crashed into a mountain. This was the song. Note this song is in Sinhalese.
Kande apuna mahavanantere Isiate asantere Marua kalamituwe perenta be Sasare khageda mate varade notere Mama pattere balala uputa gadeya soyala Kiyane mi vistara karala Hota hatti galapala ehi ati dumbara kirala Gayanne mama asanne ubala Hatta hatare varuse December siweni davase Unude asanne ahase අඬාලා බෝසේ වලකුණාලු දුකසේ අසාල ආසියානේ විනාසේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාසේ මස් කෙලිය ප්‍රදේශේ පෑ 10ට බදාදා දවසේ එන පාරක්සේ පුර දෙදරුවා ආසේ කිසිවෙක් නොදැනෙති රාසේ කන්දේ අපුණ මහ වනන්තරේ DC-8 ආසන්තරේ මාරුවා කලමිතුරේ පෙරෙන්ට බෑ සසරේ කාගේද මට වරද නොතේරේ 191 දෙනෙක් ගෙන ආසයානයක් තප්පරේට වුණාලු ගොඩක් වන්දනා පිරිසක් අතර ගැනු 59 දෙනෙක් මාරු අරගත්තනේ බිල්ලක් එදා බදාදා දිනේ ආසියාන ගුවනේ මක්කම බලා පිටත් වුණේ කිසි කෙනෙක් නොදන්නේ අන්තිම ගමනය යන්නේ ඌරුවේ කළ කරුමයක් කනේ වන් තොටු පොලේ සිටන් සැකප්ම ගානකට දුරින් වැටුණා ආසියානය දැවෙමින් මස් කෙලියට නුදුරින් ගිනි ජාලා පුපුරමින් පොළවට වැටුනේ මල කඳන් කන්දේ අපුණ මහ වනන්තරේ DC-8 ආසන්තරේ මාරුවා කලමිතුරේ පෙරෙන්ට බෑ සසරේ කාගේද මට වරද නොතේරේ දවස් ගණනක් තිස්සේ මල කඳන් කැලෑවේ අස්සේ සෙව්වනේද අපේ කට්ටිය කලකට පස්සේ ලැබුණා බ්ලැක් බොක්ස් එක අයිසේ නෝට් මේ කළු පෙට්ටිය කළු පෙට්ටිය ලැබුණා ටේප්පටි කෑලි තිබුණා නමුත් මේක මට අභිරහසක් වරද හෙළි වුණා මොකක්ද කියලා වැටහුණා ඒක යාත්‍රී කරන දෝෂයක් කන්දේ අපුණ මහ වනන්තරේ DC-8 ආසන්තරේ මාරුවා කලමිතුරේ පෙරෙන්ට බෑ සසරේ කාගේද මට වරද නොතේ